We're in the second video of a 5-video series on due diligence of self-storage in today's world. And today we're going to talk about the physical inspection of a facility and working with third-party vendors you need to work with. My name's Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Quick Start Academy. And if you're watching this in 2021, the Quick Start Academy is releasing the on-demand self-storage boot camp with all of the training, including some of the details we're going into here, but everything you need to go from wherever you are, even if it's square zero, all the way into putting your first facility in service. It's the exact same material that we use in our live events and in our virtual live boot camps, but you now have access to it with all the forms, the workbook, and everything. If you want more information, you can go to creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com and find out more about it, or click below. But let's talk about physical inspections during a due diligence process. In the last episode, we covered timelines, how to set up a good timeline for your due diligence period, and what to get from the seller. So where we are is, I'm assuming that you now have a signed contract. Let's just assume we got it signed today. The contract is signed today. You've got your timeline in place. You know all the steps you're going to go through. We covered those last week. You know who's going to be doing what steps. And you have either received or are soon to receive all the items you've requested from the seller that we covered last week. So now you have a signed contract. What do? Well, what we do is, once the LOI is signed and we're negotiating the contracts, I'm also lining up my third-party vendors, and I'm lining up my inspection. I haven't signed anything with them, but I get engagement letters or contracts. Who's going to do my inspection? Who's going to do the feasibility report? Here are some of the items that we cover and that I get lined up ready to go, so that when the contract is signed, we're executing those engagement letters. So I line up a feasibility report. I line up an inspection. We're going to talk more detail about that in a second. I don't execute immediately, but I line up a geotech report if I'm doing an expansion. In other words, someone who's going to, make sure that the land can support the buildings we're going to put on it. If I need to, I line up a survey. If I need to, I line up who the engineer is going to be to help us on the conversion, the expansion, or the new construction. Depending on what state I'm in some states, the buyers get the title work. I line up who's going to do the title work. I line up an environmental. We'll talk about that in a little more detail. And I line up at least 2 lenders that I'm going to talk to. Now, in this series, we're not going to go into detail about lending because we've covered it in detail in other episodes. If you're interested in an ebook on self-storage lending, click in the comment section below, or if you're watching this at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com, just click the link in the text and you can get a free ebook that I've written on self-storage financing, talking about the options and what to do. In the boot camp, we go into a lot of detail, and there's examples of the request for loan proposals that we use. So we're not going to cover that here in this series because it's covered elsewhere. But just know that I've lined up and I'm immediately going with what information I have and setting up those appointments with the lenders. That's a good start on your third party. Now, the very first thing I do on the day the contract's signed, I execute the feasibility report engagement letter, because that's usually one of the longest lead items for us, is getting that feasibility report. They travel to the facility, they travel to the market area, there's a lot of work done. Generally, on a 3 weeks to 5 weeks on a turnaround on an engagement with a full feasibility report. Let's talk about physical building inspections. One of the main spaces you've got to work through in a due diligence period if you're buying an existing facility is getting that building or getting that facility inspected. And we've been through the gamut on this. We've tried all kinds of things. We've used commercial building inspectors. We've used local contractors. We've used the erectors we use who put up self-storage facilities. There's companies who are members of the SSA who will do your inspections for you. We've let our engineers organize the physical inspection of the buildings. We've used our own employees to do the inspections. We've done the gamut. If this is your first facility or second facility or you're new into business, I would probably recommend that you get if you can find one, a local construction building inspector, or I might recommend going in the SSA roster of vendors and SSA Self-Storage Association and find a company that will do that inspection for you. Now, with the local, let's talk about the local first. If you're using a local commercial building inspector, a couple things to think about. One, remember it's self-storage. See if they've ever done self-storage. Very often these inspectors come from the home inspection background. So very often when they're pricing on doing the inspection of a commercial building, they quote it by the square foot. However big the building is, will determine their fee. Now, remember in storage, if you've got a 60,000 square foot self-storage facility, I mean, that inspector may go in 5 units, 10 units at the most, look at the office. There's not a lot happening at a storage facility for them to inspect. They can't get in every unit. So they'll be looking at vacant units. So be sure you negotiate and discuss that with those inspectors on what they're going to charge you. What you want from these local building inspectors is usually a report, so you can show your lender or your partners or your investors, and you want them to tell you if there's anything else you need to go into more detail on, like HVAC not working, or if there's, the roof system's not in good shape. That's a good route for a small investor to use on the physical building inspections. You can also, go with a company that does this that's one of their main sources of income is doing inspections on self-storage facilities. Just keep in mind, typically a little more expensive. You got to fly them around. Their reports are excellent. But very often they have other services too that they're trying to promote to you, like managing it, doing the financial record audit, which usually we do ourselves, feasibility reports. I try not to have the person doing my feasibility report have any other vested interest in managing the asset, doing any other work other than the feasibility report. I don't want the person who's doing the inspections to also want to do my property management. I like to have them independent. That's just me, but just be aware of that. Very often these companies that do those, they also provide other services, and that's fine. Nothing against that, just be aware of that. Both of those usually create good reports. Now, remember, they're going to find stuff. That's their job. Your job as the buyer is to determine, is this really significant? Is it really significant that this I-beam is rusted? Is it really significant that the electrical on one building may need upgrading soon? Usually, the main deferred maintenance items that are going to be high-ticket items, I've already identified when I did my initial walkthrough. Like if the doors are not in good shape, or we're going to end up replacing the doors, or a large segment of it. I can kind of see that, and I have priced that in. I'm looking for these inspections for the things that I didn't know about. Some of the issues we found with these inspections are buildings that have slid off their foundations. The roof system was not the right roof system for that size building. We found, because the project was so old, all the properties around it were developed later, and they're draining onto the self-storage site, which has caused problems with the structural framework rusting out and drainage issues for the site. Those are the type things we're looking for in these inspections. Big ticket items that we don't know about, that I can't see, that will affect the overall value of the asset. Now, it's rare that we find something that we have to go back to the seller on. I'm not going to nitpick on a lot of the smaller stuff, but we have found it. I've used the erectors, the people that we engage to build our building systems, to do the inspections. They're very good. They can tell me all kinds of stuff about the buildings. Typically their reports aren't, as good as some of the other people who do it, that's their main profession, but we've used those. The only thing I would really recommend against is Uncle Harry, who knows construction and will give you his opinion of whether it's a good building or not, and you're going to run with that. I don't care how smart Uncle Harry is. My suggestion is, given the number of zeros that's usually after this purchase, get a professional inspector of some type. Let's talk about third-party vendors. Like I said, usually during the negotiation between letter of intent and contract, I'm lining up the third-party inspections that we need to do. Why? Well, because I'm usually not that involved in it. I've negotiated what's important to us and the seller through the LOI process, and for the most part, it's usually the attorneys talking back and forth during the contract negotiations. My attorney may call us and say, ask a question, or are you okay with this? And then whatever he says is what we do. But usually my experience is the attorneys are the ones that are negotiating mostly during the contract. So I'm spending my time lining up, assuming we're going to get the deal, and lining up so that I can execute those engagement letters. Again, the first one we do is the feasibility report, then the building inspection, then I'm lining up meetings with lenders, and I'm organizing we're going to talk about this next week, review the material that we get from the seller. If we're doing an expansion or conversion, I'm lining the engineer up we're going to work with, maybe an architect we're going to work with. I usually during the initial phases, I've reached out and I've got preliminary drawings from some of the self-storage fabricators. I may or may not have that at this point, but that will immediately be what I give to the civil engineer that we select. I'm trying not to spend a lot of money or any money necessarily with engineers and architects at this point until I get my feasibility report back indicating that we're going to do an expansion if it's involved, or a conversion. Now, if I've done a preliminary analysis and I'm pretty clear that the feasibility report's going to show excess demand, sometimes we may start engaging and spending money at this level. I'll leave that up to you. But as a general rule, in terms of engaging the third parties on the construction phase of it, I wait until I know that there's going to be demand for the product I'm building, and very often the feasibility reports will go into a little more detail about exactly what we should be building. But what I am doing is lining up my engineer. I'm finding out what's the approval process. Is it look like a go, or is it going to be a long, arduous process to get approvals? Will I need to make closing contingent on getting that approval? I try not to get into deals like that. Usually we're in markets where if there's already an existing storage facility, I know I can add more space on. In most cases, it's a matter of just getting your building permit and your site disturbance permit. Yes, we may have to jump through some hoops, but if the engineer tells us that these are not insurmountable hoops and there's really not a large chance of you not getting approved, we'll go on and close on the deal even though I might not have all my approvals in place. Again, I leave that up to you to decide how you want to handle that. We tend to avoid markets where there's a heavy, overburdensome regulatory environment. Now, in general, this is how we handle the third party and the building inspections. A lot more detail in the boot camp, but this should be enough to get you going on your due diligence process if that's where you are right now. So next week, we're going to go into some detail about what we do with the information we get back from the seller, and look at a financial records review and operations review. And this is important because this is the beginning of validating what's in our pro forma, as well as the beginning of starting what we're going to do in the first 90 days of ownership. So we'll talk more about that next week, and I look forward to being with you then. Thank you very much. My name's Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Storage World Analyzer. That's the financial analysis tool we use as we're analyzing the deal. That's what we update during this due diligence process. So I look forward to being with you then, and I'll see you later.